ads and cross-apply them with dis ads. So that's basically saying, judge on your flow, I'm going to go over our advantages, and I'm going to cross-apply them with their disadvantages, and which is my way of saying, I'm going to run a point-counterpoint. And so then the judge knows, okay, when I'm on my flow, when I'm like critiquing them, I know what to write down and I know what to cross off. So he's going to say, okay, she's on this point, and I'm going to cross-apply with this point. So what he's just was saying there was, you're really messy when you speak, and it's hard for the judge to, like, not messy like speaker-wise, like obviously you're an eloquent speaker, you did really well in speaker points, but just on the flow, it looks very mismatched. So it's called, yeah, so it's post markers. So you post as you go. So like I'm really messy, so I'd be like, okay, Judge, I always apologize before. I go, Judge, I know like it's gonna be really messy, I apologize, I'm gonna post the best I can as I go. What?
Can I use this?
Yeah. And so then I'll be like, okay, on their case, blah, 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 like on case, I'll be like, on their case, this point, cross it apply with our point, blah, blah, blah. This is the reason their their advantage falls, and you have to apply the impact to us. Then on their second point, on their second advantage, blah, 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 cross it apply with our advantage, blah, blah, blah. This is why it falls. Their impact cross applies to us. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So you try to mark it as you go. It's like really messy, but just try and
explain, like,
yeah, just explain. Because if you go like this, if you go like, oh, they said this, blah, blah, if you like point out some like third advantage, you're like, oh, they said this, blah, blah, this isn't true because this and this and this, the judge is gonna be like, okay, where do I put that on the like flow? Like, where did they say that in their case? Like, are you saying it goes to your case? So if you just mark it and say, on their advantage 3, here's what they said, on like, cross apply it to our case, it falls because of these reasons. And you have to, they said this was an impact, you have to cross apply the impact to our case, and this is why, like we saw it better or something like that.
And you always ask for a roadmap in the beginning?
So I always ask, if I'm first speaker, I say, Judge, do you do brief off time roadmaps? And if they say yes, then I always mark my speech in the beginning. I always say, okay, just like brief off time roadmap, Judge, this is what I'll be talking about, and you want it to keep it like really brief, but it just helps the judge mark it better so he knows what you're speaking on and where it goes on the flow.
Don't spend no more than 10 seconds on it.
I think we might need another visual representation of what a flow should look like. I think you and
That's a whole nother.
Yeah, that's like a whole nother faucet.
That'd be helpful.
Can we like have like a flow workshop on?
Yeah, we're planning one.
Yes.
Yeah.
Flow workshop, I need that.
Yeah, we're gonna get like a ton of flow paper for you guys, and we're gonna do it. I mean, flowing is adaptive to the debater. My flow is extremely different from Aaron's flow.
Yeah.
Just kind of like it would be helpful to like see an example of it because I just literally just like write down like whatever they say and I'm like that's like
yeah.
And
So
it's like
if I
2
was,
columns and I'm like yeah.
If I were to flow an argument, it would look something like this. If it was like if they were Af and I was Nick and it was their first speech, whatever. If they do the introduction right and they say this is fact based, I write fact, and I write why. They say something like, if they said like should, it signifies this, I'd be like should. Then I'd like star it because that's like obviously if I had it as a value and they had a fact, I'd say I write fact, should, circle, that's why, and I'd star it because that signals to me on my flow, this is something I really need to hit, like this is something important. So you'll adapt your own ways of marking it as a debater. Okay. I like to use stars and like crosses and lines, like my flow, like I will like connect things and like cross things out and X things. But yeah, so if they introduce fact and they say, and mine is value, I'll circle should because that's like the reason why. I'll start, then I'll move on to their definitions. I'll write their definitions. And if we have different ones, I'll star it and be like, okay, maybe talk about that. And then I'll do like, because usually they'll mark it, they say advantage 1. So I'm used to contention, so I'll just write content 1. Then they'll have their tagline. I'll write their tagline, like hegemony or something. And then they'll get their brief points, and I just do bullet points. So I'll say, these are random, 30 million something spending, econ benefit, whatever it is. And like, I don't know, something here. Like, I'll do like their 3 points under their first advantage.
You just basically mirror what this.
Yeah, so you basically just, you're mirroring what they're saying. So it's obviously very short. I just which is why it's adaptive to each debater. So I write stuff that is going to signal to me like, oh, this is what they're saying. So I'd write like the fact, and then when I'm reading it, I know, okay, their thing was like this statistic. Then they move on to advantage 2, contention 2. I write their tagline, their 3 points. And then impacts, they'll go to their impacts. They'll list them. 1, 2, these are their 3 impacts. I like always start impacts because impacts are always very important. And then if you have flex time, what I like to do is if we're in flex time and Erin's speaking next, or if I'm speaking next, I'll let Erin ask the questions. I usually write.
Erin?
Huh?
Am I Erin?
I don't know what I'm looking at. I'm just, looking around. So if I'm with Erin and I'm speaking next and I have questions, as they're writing stuff, as they're like doing their case and I come up with a question, I'll write it next to whatever they say. I'll like in a different color pen. I'll be like, if I miss the statistic, I'll be like, what was that? Stat. In like a different pen. And so if I'm speaking next, it's advantageous if you have your partner ask questions. So she knows on my paper what my questions are because I've written them in a different color pen and I have question marks and I just give them to her and have her ask the questions. And then while they're preparing, while they're doing that in flex time and I'm preparing for my next speech, I go through their things and I say, okay, so they have this. And I draw I'll write to the side, like, oh, I have a fact that disproves this. So I'll brief, be like, oh, contention 3. And I'll know that's my contention 3. And then I can introduce and say, this is wrong because of my contention 3. This is why it falls, etc. So I like to write notes on my flow, on their what they said, and then cross-apply my flow, which helps me mark my speech too. Because when I'm okay, Judge, I'm going to be talking about this, I'll be all on their case, contention 1, cross-apply it to my contention 3, and I'll tell you why their contention 1 falls. Advantage 1 falls. And then the judge knows this falls, advantage 1 falls because of my advantage 3, and then it helps them mark the flow. But your flow will look like this when you flesh out their speech, and then it gets a little messier when they introduce more speeches. So at the end of a debate, I probably have 3 papers full of flow stuff because I like flow in depth, and so he obviously flows differently. I flow in depth.
We all flow differently.
So I have 3 papers because for multiple speeches. So I'll split this. So my speech I'll on when you have flow paper's bigger. So this will be split down the middle. My speech will be over here, and then I'll flow their speech over here, and then that's where all my lines and stars come in because I'll just draw a line and be like, oh, contingent, this connects here, go over that, circle, and then I mark stuff. Really, you'll get your own style as you do this more often, but when I speak, sometimes I'll mark stuff as I speak. I'll be talking to the judge, and I'll be like, oh, blah, blah, here's my facts, this is why their contention falls. And I have a list of things I need to talk about, and so I'll mark it as I go. I say, okay, I talked about that. I obviously won't say that out loud, but I'll be like, okay, blah, 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 this falls because of this reason. Okay, next point, blah, 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 falls because of this reason. Go on. And then you can kind of just see where you've been in your speech and where you can go from there. Judge, we're approaching this resolution as a fact-based case. The reason we're doing this is because of the word should. You have to, apparently, that's very important that you address that. So you go, moving on from that, Judge, I'd like to offer up some definitions and some interpretation of the resolution. Then if you need to, you just insert your definitions, and then you go from that, okay, Judge, I'm going to give some background to this case. And your background's really brief. The ICC one, I would have just explained. The ICC is International Criminal Court, has a judge and a jury. It's much like our courts in the United States. It was established here, this is what they do. They talk about genocides and human rights violations. That background can be as brief as that. Then you move on to your case, which is the beef of your argument. So then some synonyms. I know it's really confusing because different styles of debates use different things. So when I did LD debate, it was contentions. I think in what Erin did in policy, it's advantages.
They said advantage throughout the term.
Yeah. So what they use in parley is advantages. So because I'm working on it, but because I'm in habit of saying contention, whenever I teach it. I'll say contention, but it's synonymous with advantage and argument. So then after that stuff, you got that covered, you go advantage 1, because I'm going to start using advantage because that's what they use in Parley. Advantage 1, hegemony, and then you go into the beef of your argument. So you go hegemony, you know, as like blah, blah, like big spender, we need to spend money because we're like a big superpower and like all that stuff. So that's your first advantage. You insert your evidence, your analysis, why that matters. Then you move on to advantage 2, and you say human rights. So you can go in that, human rights, blah, blah, this is why we need to spend so much for human rights. We like, for military, this is why it's connected. We have to like go to other countries and we have to have a good military so we can like rescue them from like human rights violations and genocides and stuff. So those are your 2 advantages, right? And then you can have a third, but usually you have 2 big ones, and then you have your sub points where you're like sub point A, sub point B, sub point C. So that's your framework. And then at the end, obviously you'll go, okay, Judge, I'm gonna talk about impacts. So as you're discussing your first advantage, you're gonna say, okay, like we're world superpower, this is why it's important, this is why it's linked to spending, and here's the impact if we lose hegemony. And that like the NEG has to solve that. Does that make sense?
Kind of.
Yeah, so you kind of just do it as you go. So you do that introduction, advantage 1, tagline, basically it's just hegemony, your sub points, and then after you introduce all your evidence, you need to kind of tell a narrative for the judge and say, all right, Judge, like this is what happens when we lose our hegemony, like this is what impacts. So that's when you go and look, we're exposed to nuclear threat, because if other superpowers don't think that we're a threat anymore, then like it can lead to nuclear fallout, which will lead to loss of lives, loss of resources, and like all this stuff. So you lay out the impacts. If we lose our hegemony, this is what happens, and so this is why you have to stay with us. Does that make sense?
I'm going to do an example just
Yeah,
because.
and then you go here and do the same thing where you say, okay, this is our advantage 1 tagline, basically what it is in summary, and then you bring in your points and you talk about it and say like human rights, like we need to like intervene for like genocides and like that kind of stuff, and then you intertwine your impacts in this as well. So you talk about like dehumanization, that's always a big one that Erin and I like to hit. So we say like, you know, when we don't have that military spending, we can't intervene, like these people are like wiped out, like there's genocides, they're dehumanized, like they're not even viewed as human beings anymore, and like what kind of nation would we be if we didn't intervene in that? And so you kind of lay it out for the judge, like this is basically what's at stake if you don't vote for us. So you intertwine the impacts in your argument. But that's basically how a framework would go.
Okay.
Does that make sense to everyone?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna do an example for you guys. Yeah, I'm gonna do an example for you guys.
Significantly increase its military spending. Oh god, my eyes twitching. It's been a while. Okay.
You're gonna do great.
I know.
I think you're gonna suck.
Probably. All right. Let's go. Currently, at the moment, the United States is at the forefront of being the world's largest military leader, with countries such as China and Russia drastically lacking behind the United States in terms of its military might. And because the United States is at the forefront of military spending, it's important to understand exactly why that is. It's primarily because the United States spends so much money on military spending in the first place, and has created something known as smart power. As Harvard professor Joseph Nye stated back in 2014, that smart power is a mixture of both soft power, which is things such as diplomacy, and hard power, which is military strength in the form of troops. And therefore, because the United States has been able to conquer smart power and become a world power, it's important for us to advocate for an increase in military spending for the United States for three main reasons. The first reason why the United States should increase its military spending is because of improving the nuclear arsenal. As Secretary of Defense Chuck Hagel announced, the need for an increase in the United States nuclear weapon system after years of neglect is much needed. And the initial estimate to fix these identified problems is roughly a 10% increase to the nuclear budget for at least 5 years. This is important to understand because at the moment, the nuclear arsenal is in a state of decay. And the nuclear arsenal is one of the main components in why the United States has soft power. Essentially, countries will not mess with the United States because we have nuclear weapons. And as a result of having nuclear weapons, we can see that the United States is able to have diplomatic negotiations with countries in the event that things go south. But it's also important to understand why exactly the United States is in this situation to begin with. Because as David Sanger from the New York Times explains in 2014, that nuclear weapons facilities, silos, and submarine fleets have been allowed to decay since the end of the Cold War. The Cold War ended in the 1990s. With it being 2018, it's important to understand that 28 years of decay can do a lot of damage. And that's important to understand, and why we need to increase our spending to the US military budget. Because by doing so, we have the advantage of increasing the ability to improve our nuclear arsenal. And as a result, we can have more soft power and better diplomacy in the long term. And the second reason why we need an increase in military spending is simply because of the defense of America. It's no far-fetched idea that many countries around the world are starting to develop nuclear programs of their own. And while the United States may have the biggest nuclear program in the world, we don't have anything to defend ourselves from other countries' nuclear programs. In fact, as Lauren Thompson from Forbes stated in 2015, the United States has no defense against a Russian nuclear attack because the United States' current defense system, the ground missile defense, could be overwhelmed by more than a dozen Russian warheads. This is scary, that Americans live every single day wondering on whether or not the end could be near because of geopolitics. It's important to understand that while America may have millions upon millions of dollars in millions upon millions of dollars going into its nuclear program to promote offensive weapons, there's no defense. As the saying goes, the best offense is often the best defense. And it doesn't matter if the United States can have thousands upon thousands of nuclear weapons, because all it takes is a couple dozen to overwhelm our current defenses and end it all. And because it's imperative, most debate topics are, they will cover at least two, if not all of them. For example, in that speech I just gave, it gave over healthcare, the national laboratory. It gave over economics, internet or whatever, and the case also had other economic crap. And then diplomacy, the whole smart power thing. Versus, I'm trying to think, is there anything else? I'm trying to think of a philosophical topic off the top of my head. I guess Internet of Things, for example, human life. I believe there's stuff about healthcare/vaccines in there. Maybe, I can't exactly remember, but I remember human life was a major component of that debate. Whether it's ethical, you can argue about that is people by expanding the Internet of Things and everything being connected to the internet, now your privacy is can be infringed on by other people. So is it ethical really to expand this thing when the privacy of others is at risk in their lives and stuff like that? And then of course discourse, if you expand the internet a lot more, get more people on it, you can have more spread of ideas and stuff like that. That's just the general argument on it. But yeah, of course these things can be interchanged between each other. You can argue human life, economics, and diplomacy or whatever. Really, it's all up to you, but when you're trying to think of something to argue for your debate, just think of head, and you'll be good. You'll be good. Just because those are the three main things every single debate case has.
Yeah.
Ashley, can you confirm most of the time
yeah.
at least two of those things are in debate cases.
Yeah.
And so yeah. So
Okay,
in the event
yeah.
you have you're at the tournament, there's no prep, just search for primarily I always advocate for economics, because numbers are one of the hardest things to disprove or whatever, just because it's really hard to say oh, this isn't beneficial, but it's promote like creating $1 trillion in like revenue every single year or whatever. It's like saving like all these energy costs, stuff like that.
A lot of times when you have a number thrown at you, you want to try and make it so that you want to like try and expose it for like not telling the whole story or something like that. You'd be like, oh, this only says like one thing. And
Yeah, normally with a lot of economic stuff, it's a double-sided thing.
Yeah.
Just because it promotes like $500 billion, there's something like behind that. It's just finding it. So.
Yeah, total.
Like this is just like, here, Raya. That's how you do it.
Yeah. So. Do you want to give it a shot now?
Honestly, I do not have anything like at all. Like, I would need more time, but I don't think that I can do this. Like, I don't know.
I can give you.
Maybe like take it and like go through the facts on it and then like how you would organize it.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. Is like I think putting it together in real time would be great.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I can help put it together, but
Yeah.
I don't know how
As a
to put
group.
it together.
So let me just pull up.
Yeah, I can read.
Security and like cyber attacks are like the two major things, just because they still go like hand in hand with each other.
Yeah, I'm taping everything so that.
So then let's go down.
Yes.
Let's go down all the stuff I wrote or whatever. So like first point, we're like contention 1. See you, Sean. Email me your questions, please.
Yes, I will tonight.
So like contention 1 is like global economics. Just because like the Internet of Things is like accessible to everyone, you don't want to like look at it through just the United States. You want to look at like the big picture, you know. And so.
I feel like a lot of people at the
She
debate
just
that we
said,
had focused only on the U.S. for every single
That's
resolution.
bad.
like brief description,
Always think big
speakers,
picture.
their titles,
Always
date,
think
and
big
time
picture, 'cause
location.
I feel like
Always
everything
think
stayed
big
very, very U.S.
Well,
But
yeah.
also, a lot of the
I'll
topics
let you know
were
what she
very like
says.
U.S.
But I'm sure
centered.
she
Okay,
just
so
said
like
that.
if the
She's
topics are
cool.
U.S. centered, then
Like it was like we should like tariffs are like bad for like something, or like should blank like blah 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 tariffs.
So I hung them
Yeah,
up
so
at
if it's like if
the
it's like
student media
U.S.
station.
centered,
So there's some there.
focus
And
on
then
the
tomorrow when I
U.S.
go to
But
class,
like
I'll
let's say
hang them up.
tariffs, for example. Well, like if the topic's like U.S. like China tariffs or some shit. Well, like
going into this week.
China's the top dog. Like you start fucking up China's economy, like you fuck up everything. Like it's bad.
Gets all their shit.
Okay.
And like,
And so like some
We
lenient,
haven't,
you can
like,
have some
promoted
like leniency
that.
with a lot of topics.
like nearly enough.
Um,
Like, at all.
but generally,
I think
if
that everybody
it doesn't specify the United States, just think
Okay,
big
like,
picture.
we can-
Okay.
Because also like a lot of teams will only think like U.S.
We
centric.
can break
That's
down.
what
And if you throw them a fucking
Okay.
curveball, like
You know, like,
let's say about like Africa
like,
or something, like we
was
got
not
thrown a
before
curveball about
accident,
Africa
like,
in this, I was like, shit. I'm like, okay.
uh,
Do we post a flyer in the
I'm
group chat?
just like,
too?
does Africa have electricity?
It's the plan to
Shut down the whole, because it was about like vaccines.
No.
I'll put it in the
or
group
whatever,
chat.
Yeah.
Internet
So
of
what I'll do
Things
is
helps
I'll
keep,
have
like,
a list of
vaccines
things that
cold
I
or
don't
some
want
shit in
to do that
Africa.
everyone to do. So I'm gonna
I
have
just
them
like,
post the flyer
does
on
Africa
social
have
media.
electricity?
this
And they
week.
go,
Yeah, and just
no,
just
I go,
point
thank
out, like,
you.
it doesn't matter.
It's like,
what.
simple shutdown, but like, threw,
just,
Yeah,
threw
I'm
me
going to.
off.
I'm gonna
you
say
know,
I
like,
want
what if I
everyone
didn't
from every
think
group
about that
post
simple
the flyer on
little
social
thing?
media.
So global
twice this
economics
week.
is the
I want
major
it, like
thing.
sometime during the week and then right before the event. You can
And
post it
like,
wherever you want
this
on
gets
Twitter,
into,
Instagram,
because this case is
if
complicated
all,
when it comes to
possible,
like
do
the
all.
structure of it.
I want you to
There's these
share it on
things called
Facebook.
subpoints.
And we
I
have
want
a
you to,
template for outreach.
yeah, I want to say that you're
Yeah,
going.
someone say sub
Yeah,
point A
email department
at
heads
some point,
if possible.
or you're like, what, sub point A,
and
sub
then-
point something.
Yeah.
Yeah,
They
just
So,
said it
like-
and I was like, sub point who?
to get
So
flyers
this one
from
has, like,
different
subpoint
places.
A,
And if
like,
you're in like another club or
industrial
like
internet.
organization and you have announcements,
Oh, so
like
it'd be
I'm
like
obviously
the
in
big
Greek
topics,
life,
global
like, we
economics,
have
but
chapter
your
every
subpoint
Monday,
is
there's
like
space for
subtopic is
announcements, I
industrial,
announce
and
it,
then
so
you would go into,
everyone
like,
come. So if
your,
you're in that
like,
kind of organization,
evidence
do that as well.
for the industrial
So I'll
thing,
put that in the group
and then
name.
its impact. So instead of like focusing
along
on
with the
just the
flyer.
global economics and like reasons for that, focus on something specific.
See you
within
Tuesday.
global
Later.
economics.
Thank you.
So yeah, global economics is general argument. Subpoint is like specifying something specific.
Specifying something specific about the
Yeah.
general argument.
Yeah, and
like a
generally
supporting
when you
argument.
have like
Okay.
subpoints, you're going to have two. Never be like contention 1, global economics, subpoint A, whatever, industrial internet, and that's it.
You have to support it. You can't just say the industrial.
Yeah, like if you're going to specify something, you gotta have something else that specifies. So like this one has like subpoint A, industrial internet, but it also has like subpoint B or whatever, like reducing poverty, right? So like it's two like specific arguments under the scope of global economics.
Okay.
Because if we were to put these two like without any subpoints, it kind of seemed like a mess in a way. So like this specifies like what could be two standalone arguments under like one global umbrella for like structure purposes.
Okay.
But so like let's just go with like the poverty one real quick. So like we say
Poverty, and I was like, whoa.
yeah. We talk about
How am I supposed to do this?
like IoT, which is Internet of Things, increases in like employment or whatever. Because like you increase access to the internet, so what ends up happening is if you increase access to the internet, everyone posts like job postings on the internet. You increase access, that means people have easier access to like find different jobs and stuff like that. So when people can find jobs, they can get employed. You know? So there's that. Did I include the Zuckerberg thing? Yeah. So there's a Zuckerberg thing that is basically like 140 million jobs can be created because of like the Internet of Things and like expanding it. And so like this all like impacts to like reducing poverty because that's nice, and like that goes under like the whole entire like economics and human life thing. Because if you reduce poverty, you give people a better quality of life. People have better quality of life, they can afford a house, medicine, that type of whole spiel. Generally, I like economic arguments just because they're easier to argue.
I like values.
Everyone has their own niche.
Yeah.
If you like values, go for it. And then like,
I like values.
I was like, these are all economic
about
facts.
That. That's how it was all weekend with us. They're like, here's why tariffs are great. Like you should.
yeah.
Like, please tell me why
A
tariffs
lot
are
of
good for
debate
the
topics
economy.
are often economic.
I'm like, I don't know anything about the economy. I don't know how tariffs do shit for the economy.
Yep. It's a thing
So
you
it's
start
like
learning
crash
over
course
time.
economics, like 20 minutes before going to the meeting.
Literally watching.
I was like, I guess now I understand the economy.
That's so funny.
Like when I did this thing called EdStem, like you had you basically given a question, and it'd be like just whatever, like some question about some current event or whatever, and like you couldn't use the internet. So what you had to do was like leading up towards the tournament, like you just had to save like thousands of just like articles on everything. Like I had like about like 15,000 like articles on like everything around the world going into a tournament. It was fucking horrible because I was also the only person that did it at my school, so I was like lone wolf. And so you pull like this question. I'm trying to like think of a question or whatever, but like you pull it, you have 30 minutes to like go through all your fucking files and like create a 7-minute speech answering like the question or whatever. So like normally like these weren't like easy breezy little questions. Like if you like prelims, like prelims would have like easy questions, but like when it came to like getting into like quarterfinals, semifinals, finals, those were like hard questions, and I'd be like sometimes some of them I wouldn't know. Like
Facebook.
Looking up some ones right now that are current. So like what recommendations should international financial institutions make to countries battling hyperinflation?